So, Sam, thanks so much for hopping on with me. I would love to learn a little bit about your background, if you don't mind sharing your name, your role, and what you do in software development.
Yeah. So I'm Sam. I'm a senior full stack software engineer. I've been coding for about 7 years, mostly Ruby and React, and GraphQL. I've worked at a variety of companies, startups of like 10 to 20 people, to large companies like Twitter. Um, I'm based in Austin now, but I was in, New York City at the beginning of my career for about 3.5 years.
And what types of projects do you typically work on?
I work mostly on web applications, customer-facing web applications, but also, I've worked on multiple, like, internal CRM systems, and I really like working on projects that increase, like, efficiency of, our internal customers, the agents and things like that. I've also worked on fully backend projects like, kinda like the developers portal of, that's why I was at Procore. So I worked on enabling third-party developers to create apps, using our product. And I worked on another, like, fully backend project, an automation system for policy violations when I was at Twitter.
Oh, interesting. Uh, cool. And you mentioned a couple of the languages that you used, but is there any other aspects of your tech stack that you can share? IDEs that you've used, other languages, other tools?
Yeah. So I use mostly Vim just because I was introduced to it, like, very early on in my career, and so I have a ton of shortcuts on there that enable me to, just develop very quickly in it, so I'm very used to it. But I've also tried IDEs such as, IntelliJ, and VS Code. Um, yeah, and then, yeah, as for languages, mostly Ruby on Rails, um, React, but, I've also touched Scala and some other backend languages.
Okay, cool. And, tell me about what your usual workflow looked like for managing code snippets, if you used any other generative AI tools before Pieces for Developers.
Yeah, not too much AI tools. I mean, what I've been using a lot lately is Notion, which does have some AI features. But mostly for managing code snippets, it's just version control in GitHub. If there was just like something I wanted to share with a developer, sometimes GitHub just mostly just copy and paste into Slack, the code. Um, if I were to write documentation on code, um, before Notion, it was Google Docs, which is very bad of because like things couldn't be formatted correctly, obviously. We've also tried things like, company-specific Stack Overflows, so it would be just like question and answer or sharing code snippets just within the company.
That's super interesting. So, did it require sort of, this internal Stack Overflow? Did you have to do a lot of documentation around those code snippets? Or was it sort of, you just paste a snippet, brief overview? What did that look like?
It was mostly like how Stack Overflow is, like, used today in terms of, like, debugging or, like, asking questions, but it was, like, for, like, internal pieces of code. So it was like, we wanna know, like, how would you typically, or, like, say, like, if you were, like, on call, and you get a service request, like, "We need to, fix this person's life application," whatever, there's, like, a bug in it. How would you go about doing this in the console or something like that? So you'd be able to ask, like, very specific questions that, like, obviously weren't gonna be on Google that maybe I would typically, like, look in Slack history for, but it was just, very similar to, like, how you use Stack Overflow, where you could ask a question, you could, like, one up, answers, things like that, and then you can, like, also reply answers, and part of that is code snippets for sure, like, just run this script or things like that.
So, kind of like a internal messaging board.
Yeah.
Um, Essentially, another just a more complex thread within Slack, perhaps.
Yeah, 100%. It's very that it yeah, it's pretty much the same thing as, like, just searching in Slack or, a thread in Slack.
Okay. And what are sort of some of the inefficiencies that you experienced with that method or using Slack for reusing that code? Did you find yourself spending a lot of time searching for code snippets that you had to reuse or referencing, oh, what was the context of what this coworker said when I was trying to, actually utilize this snippet?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Google Docs was, like, very bad, but, like, if, like, people if we would screenshot pieces of code in the Google Docs, like, it's pretty useless in terms of, like, actually putting that anywhere. But just for documentation purposes, it's kind of always been a pain to document code in a way that, like, like, combining context and words also with, like, the code and figuring out how to do that in, like, a good way. Notion has some, like I think Notion has made that a little bit easier. Um, but yeah, in terms of, like, actually finding code snippets, like, so finding, like, questions that were asked before, um, I I use Slack a lot for that, for, like, internal, like, questions I have on code, but the problem is it needs to be, like, an exact text match. Like, I can't be like I have to, like, remember, like, if I wrote something to someone, I have to remember what exactly how did I word it exactly? So I just end up having to, like, remember exactly how I wrote words because you can't just be like, that time we were talking about the code snippet for how to do XYZ. So that's definitely a pain point is that exact match. So searching, is definitely a pain point, and then organization is just like, where is it? Things like that.
Right, right. So it's almost like search engine optimization, you're like remembering keywords that you
Yeah.
wrote down to try to find things again.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about pieces a little bit. Has pieces enabled you to manage these code snippets a little bit better or, find things that you want to reuse later on?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, like, I was able to just, like, add my entire repo, and it pulled out, like, 50 snippets for me that I was able to save. Um, but, like, the real useful part of that is the context that it adds. It adds, like, exactly what the code does, and then it has, like, little short, snippets of information as well. So pretty much is basically documenting my code, which is probably my least favorite thing to do, is, like, documenting code at all. So I feel like using Pieces, I'm able to just, like, pretty much eliminate documentation or at least make it much easier to do. Um, I think, like, sharing those code snippets too, the shareable link is, like, awesome, and I love that it includes all the context, so you really, like, don't really need to do that much work to, like, explain what you're sending over to someone. Just give them the link, and it has, like, everything you need in there. So that's been really useful.
Right, there's kind of 2 types of documentation. Would you agree, like, there's documentation for yourself trying to find code snippets that you might reuse that you've written earlier, and then there's documentation so that you're delivering enough context to a colleague that needs to understand, what is this code snippet? How does it work?
Yeah.
And so, speaking on the latter part, the collaboration aspect of documentation, have you found yourself, sending shareable links to coworkers so that they get that sort of, surrounding context and metadata of the code snippet? Or, like how do you integrate your existing tools with pieces in that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I think I maybe sent 1 or 2 in the time I was using it, but I absolutely plan on using that anytime I am going to be sending code snippets. That's definitely seems like the best way to do it. It's super easy just to, like, copy and then, get all that context directly. Um, and I think that's, like, how I'm going to introduce this to coworkers because I think it's very valuable, to, like, actually try it out that way. But yeah, like, how you were saying, like, there's, like, your own internal documentation and then, like, collaboration documentation, like, that context around it and, like, all, like, the actual comments on the code, I feel like is very good for collaboration if you're not the one that wrote the code. And for me personally, what I love is about the code snippets is I can search that context. So even though I won't maybe be, like, reading it because I already know what the code does. I wrote it, it's still like I can find it. So like that issue of like the exact text match in Slack like won't exist anymore. I'll just be like, um, you know, built this is obviously a very simple example, but like build user's name or something and it'll find my full name method. That's just like a very oversimplistic example. Um, But yeah, I love that it can find basically you're searching like the actual functionality of the code, which you can't do anywhere else that I know of.
And it's too bad that, you don't use Microsoft Teams. That is our one collaboration tool that we integrate with right now, and, we've open sourced, Pieces OS so that we can get some help in building new integrations, but Slack is definitely gonna be a top priority. Some of the features that will likely be included in there are, for example, someone sends a screenshot of code, you could just type at pieces extract, and it'll pull out all of the code, make it instantly savable with the click of a button. And, let's say you save a code snippet from a colleague from Slack, you'll be able to have that anchor in your Pieces desktop application where you can go into the context of the code snippet that's saved and return back to that place in the conversation so that you can not have to do the searching within Slack. You can find, oh, who sent this to me? What were they talking about when they sent it? Um, so that you can pick up, things from your colleagues, you can pick up where you left off. Is that something that sounds useful to you as a developer?
Yeah, no, absolutely. If there was a way to like get all the context and all the like benefits of pieces, but still have it link back to that Slack thread, which also probably has some like non-code context in it, that would be amazing. Yeah. So Slack integration would definitely be very useful.
Right. And, I'm curious on your feedback on this Stack Overflow method. Like, do you find that that method is more sort of efficient for your team than just using Slack since you have more organized sort of messaging boards? Is there a way that you might think that pieces could fit into this sort of style, whether it's like posting your shareable links within that forum or, obviously you can right now you could use the Chrome extension so that you can save anything from those Stack Overflow boards and be able to return back to them easily. Curious on your thoughts there.
Yeah, I could see like being able to save the snippets directly from Stack Overflow, but that was actually at a previous company and I think like you said, it's like it's basically a Slack thread where it's like I I think for internal questions and things like that, I find Slack even more efficient. But tied in with pieces would like get pretty much the best of both worlds. Um,
Okay. Yeah, we're just starting to focus on, up until now, these past couple years, we've really focused on features for the individual developer
mhm.
and, that first type of documentation like you were talking about. But we are starting to focus on collaboration features that enterprise companies can use to be able to, collaborate more easily, share code snippets. What would it look like for you if there were some sort of like centralized hub, where your team can, a folder, for example, maybe a Google Drive for code snippets, you could say, where there's a searchable repository of snippets that your team can share. And you could go within your own Pieces desktop application and search for those things, not only in your own repository, but also in shared repositories. Is that something that you might find useful?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said, like we're mostly just like saving, documentation, things like that in Notion and things like that where, it's not code first. Like it would want I definitely want it to be more than just the snippets, which it is actually. It includes all the context and things like that, but it'd be great. I don't know if actually if you can or not, like add your own information as well to those to that context. But yeah, just use that as our central repository for documentation. That would be amazing. And also it would be really cool that there's not a Vim integration yet, but like I know in the VS Code integration, it's like there's autocomplete of your own snippets, which is awesome. So if that was shared across the team, that'd be really cool as well. Just like it's just the snippets for the repo. So there's no reason why it couldn't be auto completing for everyone. Um, I think that would be a huge productivity boost there.
Right. Yeah, and you can edit your annotations and the other metadata of your snippets. And we are working on a Vim plugin. I know a lot of developers really like that tool and like pieces and would like to see it integrated.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you mentioned autocomplete. Do you use GitHub Copilot or other autocomplete tools like Tab9 where you're using AI to generate, to complete the sentence, or do you find it, useful more so just to complete based on the things you have saved?
I don't use anything now just because I've been meaning to try GitHub Copilot, I just haven't. But, like, looking over it, I was like, "Oh, wow, that'd be very awesome." Just, like, time saver of just, like, because right now I do shortcuts like that in Vim, but it's not pulling in entire code snippets and things like that. It's just, like, words, obviously, or things like that, method names. So I think it would be super useful. I just haven't tried it out yet.
Okay. Cool. Well, yeah. So, is there anything specific to you as a backend developer? Any use cases that you find Pieces is uniquely positioned to help make your workflow a little bit more efficient?
Yeah, I mean, so I haven't even, like, really mentioned this yet, but, like, the features that I was like like, all this code snippet and stuff like that, I think it's, like, extremely useful for collaboration, but for the just, like, single developer productivity is, like, actually how I was using this product mostly, when I was testing it out, and it has been, like, the most impressive and cool is, like, Copilot. Um, it's, like, been amazing. I use it every time I code now. Especially the Chrome extension, like, just being, like, directly on the side of my browser, it doesn't disrupt my workflow at all, and I'm using it now as my first, tool for searching. So, like, before I go to Google, I go to Copilot because basically I was using Google as a way to probably get to Stack Overflow to find the exact answer to the question I'm looking for. So, that's it has been efficient. It's worked for this long, and I will find what I need, but usually Copilot can give me the answer immediately. So that's been awesome. Um,
Thanks. So when do you use the Pieces Copilot within the desktop application first, or are you sort of like using it in the browser, finding other snippets and understanding them, and then generating around that? Or tell me about that a little bit.
I've been using it mostly as, like, so I use it mostly on the Chrome extension. I do use it on the app also sometimes, just because I want to try out both, but the Chrome extension is what's been very useful for me, because it's right in my browser. I don't need to, like, keep switching back and forth, especially for parsing API documentation. It's been, like, a game changer. The first thing I used it for is, like, I'm, like, integrating with the library full calendar, just to build, like, a calendar timeline, and questions I was like, what I would usually just look through the documentation for, I was just able to ask. I'm like, "Can this do multiple events on the same time?" For example. And, it was able to give me those answers immediately. Um, so that I mean, I was just super impressed by that, and I love that I don't have to keep reminding it the context of what I'm doing. I can just, like, continue the conversation. So, it kind of acts as, like, the the navigator in, like, a pairing relationship, like driver navigator. It's like my navigator. It's doing the research for me. Well, I can just keep going, keep coding, and just get those answers immediately. Um, so that's been super useful. Um,
Nice.
and then also with just problem solving. So, like, before I was using Full Calendar, I was trying to use a different library, because I needed multiple events on the same time. Um, and so, like, I had to problem solve that myself and, like, work through 'cause I really want to use this library. I already had it integrated so much in my, system, like, how can I make this work? So, I ended up coming up with a solution that, custom CSS, whatever. But this was before I was using Pieces. So I just was wondering, so I asked it, like, the same thing, like, "Can I use Prime React to do multiple events on the same time grid?" And it was like, "No, but you could use custom CSS." Like, it, like, came up with, like, the same solution that I came up with, but obviously instantly. So you can imagine how much of a productivity boost that is. So, like, I mean, like I said, I'm going to Copilot now first when I'm, like, problem solving. Like, the first thing I do is, like, work with that, and when I'm working on side projects or working on projects alone, it feels like I have a coworker that I'm bouncing ideas off of, so it's, like, super helpful.
So you're a pretty experienced developer. I mean, you have 7 plus years of experience under your belt, right? Um, do you find that you sort of make assumptions about things that you're trying to solve? You might have a hypothesis of how you want to solve a certain problem, and then you confirm that hypothesis using the Pieces Copilot.
Yeah, that's how I'm using it now, but I can imagine it, like, being even earlier on in the problem solving process where, I might not there's always multiple ways to solve things, obviously. So I'm not always just going to accept the first thing it says, but I think it can, like, really short circuit, like, ideas, like, you know, that solution that I came up with, I didn't come up with it immediately, I had to think about it, and Copilot came up with it immediately. So it definitely would just, like, help me, work through problems or, like, come up with potential solutions a lot quicker. And then, like I said, also bounce ideas off of, like, I can imagine, like, just talking to it, like, "Is this solution scalable?" Like, "What problems do you see with doing this sort of solution?" Because it did even point out issues with, well, custom CSS can get really complicated, it's not scalable, so things like that. It's, like, really just, like, working with another person.
Nice. And do you find any benefit of having your Copilot conversations persisted to the other applications as well? I mean, if you're using VS Code, the browser, desktop application, do you ever pick up where you're left off on the different app?
Yeah, like, I think it's been useful for especially this time with the holidays, where you just, like, close your computer and you're, like, not looking back at it. It was really helpful to be able to just jump right back in. I could just, like, look at the history, like, what questions was I asking? Like, what snippets was I saving? Like, and just remember, "Oh, yeah, I was working on full calendar, timeline view," like, and get that context just immediately. So that is useful for, like, periods of time, where you might be picking up where you might be, like, working on multiple things at once, also, like, just hopping back in, understanding where you were in that problem.
Right. And so have you tried out the workflow activity view where you're looking at, the timeline, a change log of events that you completed within the application, within the integrations?
Yeah, I did, I tried that out, I think just, like, yesterday, I was hopping back into, like, what I was working on before, and I was able to, like, actually see, what were the questions I was asking, and that's helpful as well, but it's really cool to see, like, exactly what problem I was, like, solving at that moment, so yeah, that's been helpful.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, we do I think when you're integrated with VS Code, we'll actually pull the Git history into your workflow activity. So that would be, really nice for a backend developer using Vim once we integrate. Um, but yeah, is there any other sort of like well, you talked about context. So are you finding yourself setting specific context for your conversations as you're going along, or are you sort of, selecting code snippets that you find on the browser or that you're working with in VS Code and setting that as the context for your conversation? Or do you, explicitly set certain repositories or code snippets as your context before you start talking to Pieces Copilot? Or are you just relying on the retrieval augmented generation where it's learning from your workflow. It's understanding you as a backend developer and just generating more contextual, personalized answers over time.
Yeah, I definitely wanna explore more of it, like, learning my workflow, things like that, but I've just been using it is I set some context at the beginning, like, I'm building XYZ, I'm using this library, and then I'll ask it a question, and then from there, it seems like it's just a conversation. I don't have to keep saying, "Okay, I'm working on XYZ, I'm using full calendar." I don't even have to mention full calendar again. I'm just like, "And how do I, um, instantiate it to use this start time?" For example, and it just knows what I'm talking about. Um, so that's sort of context I'm able to just, like, give it up front and not have to keep repeating with every question I'm asking it.
Nice. We did recently release a feature where you can select specific messages within your conversations as well to set as context. I mean, it's already set as context, but ChatGPT and other generative AI tools can start to hallucinate with some of these longer conversations. And so have you tried that feature where you click on a message and add it to context, or is it just fine already?
I haven't tried it yet. I've done, like, there you can hover over messages in Copilot as well and, like, copy it. I've used that if I wanna, like, ask a question very similar, but I haven't actually tried to, like, set as context yet.
Cool. Are there any other, sort of, features that stood out to you within Pieces or any other, efficiency boosts, productivity boosts that you wanna mention?
I think just I mean, things I've mentioned, honestly, like, just, like, the problem solving with Copilot has been amazing, coming up with solutions instantly. Um, API documentation has been, like, really awesome. Like, just not having to jump to Google, I just jump to Copilot and it gives me the answer, so I don't have to, like, sift through Stack Overflow questions.
We do have a feature that automatically hides the sensitive information and flags it if you try to create a shareable link or something like that.
Oh, very cool. No, I haven't tried that yet, but that is actually very cool. Um, yeah, 'cause that is always a pain, like, when you're sharing something on, like, public, you have to be like, "Insert key here," or something. I'd be interested to see how it, kind of, hides that.
If you're talking about a certain API key, you don't really want ChatGPT to use that information for training. I know there's been some issues with, some companies like Samsung stop using ChatGPT because of those types of data leakage issues. So, local large language models, do you think that, is more secure path to code generation?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I haven't played around with it too much. I've been using just the blend of, like, um, online and, on device, which has been, like, great and serving all my needs, but, I could definitely see the use of using those large language models as well
Yeah.
locally.
Are there any other sort of features that you think pieces should adopt so that we can, continue creating a great tool for our users?
One thing I tried to do, I think, was summarize, like, a tech talk. It could be, 'cause I thought I saw somewhere that it could do that, but I don't think it was able to, like, just watch a video and summarize, the whole thing, uh,
Mhm.
just because 'cause I'm impatient. I usually watch things on 2 times speed, but if I could just get, like, a pulled out summary of a tech talk, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, we are working on that. We have, basically all of the ML infrastructure for video OCR, which would go frame by frame, watch a whole video, pull out all of the useful code snippets and context of the video, and even summarize it. So that's some interesting capabilities that we'll be able to,
Yeah.
do once that bubbles up into the app. It's still just in our ML infrastructure right now, but you could watch a 25-minute video in 3 minutes, which is
Yeah.
pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would definitely use that.
So, what's your overall satisfaction level, and would you recommend pieces to others?
Yeah, absolutely would recommend it. I actually just showed it to my nephew. He's just getting into coding, so, he thinks it's awesome. And like I said, I'm definitely gonna share with my coworkers as well, so super satisfied. I definitely plan on using it continuing to use it every day as I'm working.
Awesome.